Hollywood didn't invent World War II cinema, they just commercialized it. While Americans were making flag-waving propaganda, filmmakers across Europe and Asia were creating raw masterpieces from the rubble of their bombed cities. Did you know the most devastating war film ever made was shot by a director who survived Nazi occupation as a teenager? Let's count down the 20 greatest W2 films Hollywood never had the guts to make. Number 20, Land of Mine, Denmark, 2015. Denmark flipped the noble Allied forces narrative on its head with this brutal post-war drama about German teenage POWs, forced to clear deadly mines from Danish beaches. These boys weren't hardened Nazi soldiers. They were terrified kids, some as young as 14, conscripted in Hitler's desperate final months. The Danish sergeant overseeing them initially sees only enemies deserving punishment, until their humanity slowly breaks through his hatred. Director Martin Zandvliet shot real explosions with minimal CGI, capturing genuine fear on his young actors' faces. During production, they stumbled upon actual unexploded W2 mines on the very beaches where they were filming. The Danish military had to temporarily shut down production to safely remove them. Critics praised the film's unflinching moral complexity, with The Guardian calling it a strong corrective to the simplistic good versus evil narrative that dominates mainstream war films. Despite its modest $3.2 million budget, Land of Mine scored an Oscar nomination and sparked heated debate in Denmark, where many still defend the use of German POWs for deadly clearance work that killed thousands. The film's power comes from showing how quickly victors can become oppressors. As one Danish critic noted, it forces us to confront our national myth that we were only victims during the war, never perpetrators. Number 19. The Bridge, Germany, 1959. While American directors were making John Wayne heroics, German filmmaker Bernhard Wicki delivered this gut-wrenching anti-war classic about 7 teenage boys, drafted in the war's final days, to defend a meaningless bridge in their hometown. These kids, still trading comic books and crushing on local girls, are handed rifles and ordered to die for a Reich already collapsing around them. What makes this film revolutionary is that it was made by Germans just 14 years after the war ended, forcing audiences to empathize with the enemy's children. The production recruited actual German war veterans as technical advisors, many of whom broke down during filming, as they recalled their own teenage conscription. The bridge was based on an autobiographical novel by Gregor Dorfmeister, who fought at 16 and was the only survivor of his unit. Critics worldwide recognized its universal power. Roger Ebert later wrote that, "The tragedy isn't that they died for their country, but that they died at all." The film won the Golden Globe for Best Foreign Film and was nominated for an Oscar. Its final sequence, where a surviving boy attacks American troops trying to help him, remains one of cinema's most devastating portrayals of war's psychological damage. As one German critic noted, this wasn't just a war film. It was national therapy for a generation raised on Hitler Youth propaganda. Number 18, Kanal, Poland, 1957. Long before Hollywood discovered the horrors of the Holocaust, Polish director Andrzej Wajda delivered this claustrophobic nightmare about Warsaw resistance fighters retreating through the city's sewers during the doomed 1944 uprising. The film opens with a narrator bluntly announcing that we're watching doomed men who have only hours to live, then forces us to follow their agonizing final journey. Wajda knew this nightmare intimately. He fought in the Polish resistance as a teenager, and many of his friends died in these very sewers. The production shocked audiences by filming in actual Warsaw sewers, with actors wading through filthy water for weeks, leading to numerous infections and illnesses. Several crew members were hospitalized with rat bites. Critics recognized its unflinching power immediately. Kanal won the Special Jury Prize at Cannes, though Polish communist authorities tried to suppress it, fearing its depiction of the failed uprising would inspire anti-Soviet sentiment. The film launched Wajda's career and established the Polish film school movement that would produce some of Eastern Europe's greatest directors. What makes Kanal devastating isn't just its physical horror, it's watching hope slowly die. As one character reaches what he believes is an exit to the Vistula River, he discovers it's barred with iron gates, delivering the film's crushing metaphor for Poland's trapped existence between Nazi and Soviet power. Number 17. Rome, Open City, Italy 1945. Roberto Rossellini didn't wait for the war to end before making this revolutionary drama. He started filming while Nazi troops were still occupying parts of Rome, using film stock purchased from street photographers and developing it in bathtubs. The result wasn't just a movie. It was cinema's first raw testimony of fascism's horror from those who lived under it. The film follows a resistance fighter, a priest, and a pregnant widow navigating Nazi-occupied Rome, culminating in scenes of torture so realistic that audiences believed Rossellini had used actual documentary footage. In reality, he was working with a skeleton crew, non-professional actors, and bombed buildings as natural sets. The production constantly had to move locations when they heard German patrols approaching. Critics now recognize it as the film that launched Italian neo-realism, with sight and sound placing it among the 10 greatest films ever made. What Americans didn't realize was how controversial the film was in Italy itself. Rossellini was accused of being opportunistic, switching from making fascist propaganda films to anti-fascist works as soon as the political winds changed. The film's most haunting sequence shows children watching a priest's execution, their innocence forever shattered. As Martin Scorsese later noted, Open City didn't just record history, it became part of history, showing the world what fascism really meant to those who survived it. Number 16. Cross of Iron, UK, West Germany, 1977. Sam Peckinpah, Hollywood's master of violence, fled to Germany to make this uncompromising anti-war film that American studios wouldn't touch. A brutal drama told entirely from the German perspective, following Wehrmacht soldiers retreating from Russia. James Coburn leads a band of exhausted veterans fighting not just the advancing Soviets, but also their own glory-hungry Prussian officer. The production was chaos incarnate. Yugoslavian extras playing Russian soldiers got drunk on their lunch breaks and fired live ammunition during battle scenes. Peckinpah himself was alcoholic, cocaine addicted, and suffering from depression, often showing up incoherent on set. Yet somehow, his personal disintegration translated into a perfect portrait of war's moral collapse. The film nearly destroyed Peckinpah financially when German producers went bankrupt mid-production. He had to finish shooting with money from his own pocket while suffering pneumonia. Critics initially dismissed it, but Orson Welles called it the finest anti-war film since All Quiet on the Western Front. The film's most controversial sequence, where Coburn laughs maniacally at his aristocratic commander during a Russian attack, became a cinematic symbol of class warfare within the German military. As film historian David Weddle noted, Peckinpah wasn't just showing war's physical brutality, but the way it corrupts every human institution, especially rigid hierarchies like the German officer corps. Number 15. The Ascent, Soviet Union, 1977. While Hollywood was making The Great Escape, Soviet director Larisa Shepitko delivered this spiritual masterpiece about two partisans who leave their starving unit to find food in Nazi-occupied Belarus. What begins as a survival story transforms into a Dostoevskian moral drama about martyrdom versus betrayal under unimaginable pressure. Shot in conditions so cold that cameras froze solid between takes, the production pushed actors to genuine physical suffering in 40-degree temperatures. The crew built special platforms to move equipment through waist-deep snow. Shepitko herself was pregnant during filming, but insisted on physically demonstrating every difficult scene for her actors, including crawling through frozen forests. Critics worldwide recognized its transcendent power, with the film winning the Golden Bear at Berlin. Soviet authorities nearly banned it for its religious symbolism. The protagonist's journey clearly parallels Christ's passion, but relented when international acclaim became overwhelming. Tragically, Shepitko died in a car accident just 2 years later, at age 41, making this her final statement. The film's most devastating scene shows a local villager identifying partisans to the Nazis. His moral collapse contrasted with the captured partisan who chooses execution over collaboration. As critic Roger Ebert wrote, "The Ascent doesn't just show physical suffering, but the more terrifying prospect of losing one's soul under pressure. It asks what any of us would do facing such impossible choices." Number 14. Come and See, Soviet Union Chao Belarus, 1985. Director Elem Klimov created cinema's most devastating war film by showing the Nazi occupation of Belarus through the eyes of a teenage boy whose face physically ages decades over the film's 142 minutes. This isn't just a war movie, it's a descent into hell that permanently scarred audiences worldwide. The production's approach to realism bordered on abuse. Klimov used real ammunition firing over 14-year-old actor Alexei Kravchenko's head. The boy's hair reportedly turned gray during the 9-month shoot. For the infamous barn-burning sequence, the crew constructed and burned actual buildings with people inside screaming. Soviet censors delayed the film for 8 years, claiming it was too realistic and would traumatize viewers. When finally released, critics recognized its unique horror. Roger Ebert called it one of the most devastating films ever made. The film's most haunting sequence involves the protagonist finding his entire family and village massacred in a genocide that claimed 628 Belarusian villages and over 2.2 million civilians. What makes Come and See revolutionary is its hallucinatory subjectivity. The sound design mimics the boy's bombing-induced hearing loss, while the camera increasingly distorts reality as his psyche fractures. As film historian Mark Cousins noted, most war films show what battle looks like. Come and See shows what genocide feels like from inside the victim's disintegrating mind. Number 13. Grave of the Fireflies, Japan, 1988. Studio Ghibli's devastating animation masterpiece follows 2 orphan children slowly starving to death in the firebombed ruins of 1945 Japan. If you think cartoons can't break your heart, this film will prove you catastrophically wrong. Director Isao Takahata based the film on his own experiences surviving American firebombing raids that killed nearly 100,000 Japanese civilians in a single night. The film opens with 14-year-old Seda announcing, September 21st, 1945. That was the night I died. The remaining film shows how he and his 4-year-old sister Setsuko reached that point, their deaths not from bombs, but from societal indifference. Critics worldwide recognized its unique power, with Roger Ebert calling it one of the greatest war films ever made. Yet in Japan, the film remains controversial. Some view it as anti-war testimony, while others see it as whitewashing Japan's imperial aggression. The author of the semi-autobiographical novel it's based on, Akiyuki Nosaka, wrote the story partly out of guilt. His own sister died of starvation, while he survived by stealing food. The film's most devastating sequence shows little Setsuko creating a meal of mud balls, pretending they're rice dumplings as she slips into delirious starvation. As film critic Ernest Riester wrote, Grave of the Fireflies is not entertainment. It's a sledgehammer to the soul that forces us to recognize humanity in those our countries once designated as enemies. Number 12. Fires on the Plain, Japan, 1959. Director Kon Ichikawa delivered this nightmarish vision of Japanese soldiers starving in the Philippines during the war's final days. Reduced to such desperation, they begin hunting each other for food. Hollywood would never dare make a film where the protagonists become cannibals, but Ichikawa refused to flinch from Imperial Japan's military collapse. The production pushed actors to physical breaking points. Star Eiji Funakoshi lost so much weight during filming that doctors warned he was approaching dangerous malnutrition. Ichikawa insisted on filming in harsh jungle conditions where the crew battled constant illness. The Japanese government tried to pressure Ichikawa to abandon the project, considering it national humiliation. Critics were stunned by its unflinching portrayal of Japan's military collapse. The New York Times called it one of the most brutal and horrifying documents of war ever put on film. The film became part of Japan's reckoning with its wartime conduct, arriving the same year as the massive protests against renewal of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. The film's most disturbing sequence shows hungry soldiers mistaking distant gunfire for the sound of potato harvesting, walking dreamlike into an American ambush. As Japanese film historian Donald Ritchie noted, Ichikawa shows war stripping away civilization in layers, first pride, then morality, eventually humanity itself, until nothing remains but animal hunger and the instinct to survive at any cost. Number 11. Stalingrad, Germany 1993. German director Joseph Vilsmeier recreated the Eastern Front's apocalyptic turning point through the eyes of a Wehrmacht platoon as they transform from conquering warriors to frozen corpses in the Russian winter. What begins as a conventional war film gradually becomes a surreal journey into history's most nightmarish battle, where over 2 million died. The production's commitment to realism was fanatical. Filming in sub-zero temperatures, actors weren't allowed heating between takes, so their visible breath and shivering would be genuine. For the crossing of the frozen Don River, performers plunged into real ice water as cameras rolled. The film's $20 million budget was astronomical for German cinema of that era, but producers believed Germans needed to confront their Eastern Front atrocities. Critics praised its unflinching depiction of both German war crimes and soldiers' suffering. As critic Roger Ebert noted, the film shows German soldiers as both perpetrators and victims, a moral complexity Hollywood war films rarely attempt. The movie became required viewing in German military academies as a study in battlefield ethics. Its most haunting sequence shows starving, frostbitten soldiers huddled in ruins as a portable gramophone plays Silent Night amid constant artillery fire, a Christmas scene from hell. As German historian Wolfram Wette observed, Stalingrad forced Germans to confront not just our defeat, but the immeasurable suffering our invasion inflicted on Russia. It's a visual history lesson on why Germans must never again follow leaders into catastrophic wars. Number 10. The Captain, Germany 2017. Director Robert Schwenke delivered this stomach-turning true story shot in stark black and white about a German deserter in the war's final weeks who finds an abandoned officer's uniform, puts it on, and transforms from hunted fugitive into sadistic killer. Based on the real case of Willy Harold, the executioner of Emsland, who murdered over 170 people in just 8 days of power. The production's commitment to historical accuracy borders on the pathological. For the scene where the false captain executes deserters, Schwenke filmed at the actual location where Harold committed his crimes. The crew discovered human remains during set construction. German authorities temporarily halted filming for proper archaeological examination. Critics were divided on the film's unflinching brutality. Variety called it a savage satire about how power corrupts, while others questioned whether such extreme depictions of Nazi atrocities committed by a lowly imposter risked diminishing Holocaust responsibility. The film sparked debate in Germany about whether it's appropriate to portray Nazi criminals with psychological nuance. The film's most controversial sequence shows a camp of German deserters enthusiastically joining the fake captain's execution squad, revealing how quickly the oppressed become oppressors given the slightest authority. As German film scholar Anton Keyes noted, the captain isn't just about one man's moral collapse, but about an entire society's complicity in atrocity. It suggests the Nazi uniform itself contained corrupting power, regardless of who wore it. Number 9. Das Boot, Germany 1981. Wolfgang Petersen locked audiences inside a German U-boat for 149 claustrophobic minutes, forcing viewers to empathize with young submariners fighting for a regime they increasingly doubt. The film's genius is making you forget you're rooting for Nazis as depth charges explode around the submarine's paper-thin hull. The production's commitment to authenticity bordered on sadism. The replica U-boat interior was deliberately built smaller than actual scale to increase claustrophobia. Director Petersen banned deodorant on set to create authentic submarine stench. Actors weren't allowed to go outside during the 40-day shoot, so their skin would develop the correct pallor. Several performers had genuine mental breakdowns from claustrophobia. Initially met with suspicion as humanizing Nazis, critics eventually recognized its anti-war power. The film received 6 Oscar nominations, unprecedented for a German-language film. With a $15 million budget, it was then the most expensive German film ever made, but grossed over $80 million worldwide. Its most technically impressive sequence, a 15-minute dive to avoid destroyer attack, was shot with a full-scale submarine mock-up that could actually submerge and surface hydraulically. As critic Roger Ebert noted, Das Boot accomplishes what seems impossible. It makes us care about the fate of a German U-boat crew while never letting us forget they're serving Hitler's genocidal regime. That's the essence of great war cinema, showing humanity inside even the enemy. Number 8. Downfall. Germany 2004. Oliver Hirschbiegel took viewers inside Hitler's bunker for the Nazi regime's final days, creating such a viscerally realistic portrayal that its infamous Hitler rant scene spawned thousands of internet parodies. Based on first-hand accounts of those present, the film shows the Führer's psychological disintegration as Soviet troops close in on Berlin. The production's attention to detail was obsessive. Set designers recreated the bunker's exact dimensions using original blueprints. Bruno Ganz, playing Hitler, studied the only existing recording of Hitler's natural speaking voice and consulted Parkinson's disease specialists to accurately portray his tremors. For bunker suicide scenes, the crew referenced autopsy reports to ensure accuracy. The film sparked fierce debate about whether portraying Hitler with any humanity risked normalizing evil. Jewish groups initially condemned it, while German critics praised its unflinching history lesson. With a $15 million budget, it earned $92 million worldwide, and an Oscar nomination. Ironically, the same scene that serious critics praised became an internet meme, with Hitler ranting about everything from Xbox failures to sports disappointments. Its most devastating sequence shows Magda Goebbels methodically poisoning her 6 children, rather than letting them live in a world without National Socialism. Evil distilled to its essence. As German historian Julius Schoeps observed, downfall forces us to recognize Hitler was human, not a supernatural monster, which makes his crimes more terrifying. If he were merely a monster, we could distance ourselves. His humanity implicates all of humanity. Number 7. The Cranes Are Flying. Soviet Union, 1957. Director Mikhail Kalatozov shattered socialist realism constraints with this emotionally devastating story of Veronica, a young woman whose fiancé volunteers for the front. Instead of glorifying Soviet heroism, the film dares to show her rape by her boyfriend's draft-dodging cousin, her subsequent PTSD, and civilian suffering rarely acknowledged in Soviet cinema. The production featured revolutionary camera work by cinematographer Sergei Urusevsky, who created techniques still studied today. For the bombing sequence, he strapped himself to a motorcycle with a handheld camera, riding at high speed through explosions. The actress playing Veronica wasn't told when explosions would occur, ensuring her genuine terror on camera. The film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, the only Soviet film to ever receive that honor. Khrushchev's Thaw allowed its release despite its rejection of Stalin-era heroic narratives. The film influenced generations of filmmakers with its subjective camera work and psychological complexity. Its most innovative sequence shows Veronica's fiancé dying in a birch forest, the camera spiraling around trees in a balletic expression of his departing consciousness. As film historian Denise Youngblood noted, The Cranes Are Flying was revolutionary for showing that Soviet victory came at devastating cost to individuals. It acknowledged that not every Soviet citizen reacted to the war with perfect heroism, a radical admission in 1957. Number 6. Army of Shadows, France 1969. Jean-Pierre Melville, himself a former resistance fighter, demolished romantic notions of the French resistance with this ice-cold portrayal of underground operatives who spend more time killing suspected informers than fighting Germans. There are no heroics here, just paranoid, exhausted people making morally impossible decisions while waiting for the knock at the door. The production faced constant interference from French authorities uncomfortable with its unflattering portrayal. President Charles de Gaulle personally objected to scenes showing resistance fighters executed by British allies for security reasons. Melville insisted these details remain, having witnessed similar events himself. The film was shot in the actual locations where resistance operations occurred, including the prison where Melville himself had been interrogated. Critics and audiences initially rejected the film for violating cherished myths about universal French resistance. It was commercial failure on release and wasn't even distributed in America until 2006, 37 years later, where it was finally recognized as a masterpiece. The New York Times called it one of the greatest films ever made. Its most devastating sequence shows resistance members executing a teenage informer while wearing false smiles to calm him, a scene Melville based on an execution he witnessed. As French historian Robert Paxton noted, Army of Shadows arrived when France was ready to admit its resistance was a small minority, not the national myth we had constructed. It's not just a war film, but a national reckoning with uncomfortable truth. Number 5. The Pianist, France 5, Poland, Germany, UK, 2002. Roman Polanski drew on his own childhood experiences surviving the Holocaust to create this unsparing portrait of Polish-Jewish pianist Władysław Szpilman hiding in Warsaw's ruins. What makes the film unique is its refusal to find meaning or redemption in and suffering. Survival is random, undignified, and comes at terrible moral cost. The production transformed sections of abandoned Soviet-era neighborhoods in Poland and Germany into the Warsaw Ghetto, with Polanski insisting on using actual locations where possible. Actor Adrian Brody lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks and learned to play Chopin pieces for the role. Polanski, who escaped the Krakow ghetto as a child and lost his mother at Auschwitz, would sometimes break down during filming when scenes triggered his own memories. Critics recognized its unflinching power, with Brody winning Best Actor and Polanski Best Director at the Oscars. The $35 million production grossed over $120 million worldwide. Yet controversy followed Polanski's personal history. Many questioned whether his statutory rape case should have prevented him from receiving accolades. The film's most devastating sequence shows the protagonist watching Warsaw Uprising fighters being slaughtered from his hiding place, unable to help without revealing himself, the ultimate moral trap of survival. As critic Roger Ebert wrote, "The Pianist shows survival not as triumph, but as trauma that never heals." It's one of the few Holocaust films that dares suggest surviving itself came with unbearable moral weight. Number 4. Ballad of a Soldier, Soviet Union, 1959. Grigory Chukrai crafted this heartbreaking journey of a 19-year-old Russian soldier, given a brief leave to visit his mother after an act of battlefield heroism. But bureaucracy, chance encounters, and his own compassion for strangers repeatedly delay him. The film opens by telling us he'll die before the war ends, making his race home unbearably poignant. The production faced constant political pressure. Soviet authorities wanted a traditional heroic narrative, but Chukrai, himself a wounded veteran, insisted on showing war's human cost rather than battlefield glory. The famous tank attack sequence was filmed with actual T-34 tanks, driven by veteran tankers who had fought in the locations being depicted. Several crew members were injured when a tank crashed through set walls. Released during Khrushchev's cultural thaw, the film received extraordinary international acclaim, winning Special Jury Prize at Cannes and an Oscar nomination. Ballad became the rare Soviet film embraced by Cold War America, with the New York Times calling it one of the finest films about human character ever made. Its most devastating sequence shows the protagonist finally reaching home with only minutes to spend with his mother before returning to the front, their farewell on a rural road becoming one of cinema's great tear-jerking moments. As Russian film historian Naum Kleiman noted, Ballad of a Soldier revolutionized Soviet cinema by suggesting individual human connections matter more than collective victory, a radical idea in Soviet culture. Number 3. Night and Fog, France 1956. Alain Resnais created history's most unflinching Holocaust documentary, just 11 years after the camps were liberated, combining contemporary color footage of abandoned camps with black and white Nazi archival footage so horrific that German authorities tried to block the film from screening at Cannes. This 32-minute documentary delivers more raw truth than any Hollywood Holocaust drama. The production faced extraordinary challenges. Much Nazi footage had been deliberately destroyed, forcing Resnais to piece together visual evidence from multiple sources. French censors demanded removal of a shot showing a French policeman guarding a concentration camp, attempting to hide French complicity. Resnais refused, threatening to withdraw the entire film unless the shot remained. Critics recognized its unprecedented power. Filmmaker François Truffaut called it the greatest film ever made. The film became mandatory viewing in French schools despite its graphic content. What makes Night and Fog revolutionary is its refusal to consign Nazi atrocities to finished history. The narration explicitly warns that the forces that created the camps remain with us, waiting for another chance. Its most devastating sequence juxtaposes mundane camp buildings with what occurred inside them: mountains of human hair, eyeglasses, and prosthetic limbs harvested from victims. As philosopher Hannah Arendt observed, Night and Fog forces us to witness industrial genocide without dramatic filters or narrative comforts. It shows the banality of evil in its purest form: systematic murder conducted by ordinary men as administrative procedure. Number 2. Life is Beautiful, Italy 1997. Roberto Benigni created the ultimate cinematic risk, a Holocaust comedy, and somehow crafted a masterpiece that won 3 Academy Awards. The film follows a Jewish-Italian father who convinces his young son that their concentration camp imprisonment is an elaborate game where the grand prize is a real tank. The production consulted with Holocaust survivors who were divided on the concept. Some found it offensive, while others recognized the film captured a vital truth: that humor was sometimes the only defense against Nazi dehumanization. Benigni, whose own father survived a German labor camp, based the story partly on his father's protective lies to shield him from the full horror of those experiences. Critics were sharply divided. Some called it Holocaust trivialization, while others recognized its emotional truth. Notably, Holocaust survivor and author Primo Levi had previously written about parents in camps creating elaborate fantasies to protect children's minds. The film became an international phenomenon, grossing over $230 million on a $20 million budget. Its most controversial sequence shows the protagonist deliberately mistranslating a German guard's harsh camp instructions into an explanation of the game rules, transforming Nazi brutality into fantasy for his son's benefit. As Israeli film critic Kobe Niv noted, Life is Beautiful isn't really about the Holocaust. It's about the lengths to which a parent will go to preserve a child's innocence in a world gone mad. Its genius is recognizing that sometimes imagination is the only defense against unbearable reality. Number 1. Rome, Open City, Italy 1945. Roberto Rossellini didn't wait for the war to end before making this revolutionary drama. He started filming while Nazi troops were still occupying parts of Rome, using film stock purchased from street photographers and developing it in bathtubs. The result wasn't just a movie, it was cinema's first raw testimony of fascism's horror from those who lived under it. The film follows a resistance fighter, a priest, and a pregnant widow navigating Nazi-occupied Rome, culminating in scenes of torture so realistic that audiences believed Rossellini had used actual documentary footage. In reality, he was working with a skeleton crew, non-professional actors, and bombed buildings as natural sets. The production constantly had to move locations when they heard German patrols approaching. Critics now recognize it as the film that launched Italian neo-realism, with Sight and Sound placing it among the 10 greatest films ever made. What Americans didn't realize was how controversial the film was in Italy itself. Rossellini was accused of being opportunistic, switching from making fascist propaganda films to anti-fascist works as soon as the political winds changed. The film's most haunting sequence shows children watching a priest's execution, their innocence forever shattered. As Martin Scorsese later noted, Open City didn't just record history, it became part of history, showing the world what fascism really meant to those who survived it. From Rome's ravaged streets to Belarusian killing fields, these films show BBYD's horror from perspectives Hollywood rarely acknowledges. They remind us that war isn't simply heroic Americans saving the world, but a complex human catastrophe with moral failures on all sides. Which of these masterpieces hit you hardest? Did I miss any international classics? Drop your thoughts below, and ask yourself this. Do we prefer Hollywood's sanitized war fantasies because the truth these foreign films reveal is simply too painful to accept?